So as I said, I'm used to chairing these, but you'll have to bear with me. Chairing them online is just a slightly different animal in terms of trying to make sure I'm looking at the right screen and at the right documents, and my printer is kicking up. I know I do like sometimes to have stuff in a hard copy if I can't find the screen, but I said hopefully you'll bear with me. So as Leo said, I suppose this morning really we're going to be talking about youth unemployment, and in the context of, I suppose, One World Week. Obviously NYCI, we have been working for many years on the issue of youth unemployment, and I think young people always do suffer in every context, from economic shocks and social shocks such as COVID, and youth unemployment tends to increase a lot in those shocks. And I suppose we saw that with COVID here in Ireland. We had huge levels of youth unemployment during the COVID crisis, up around 65%, which in my long period of working in the area was unheard of. And I suppose really, I think though, leaving COVID aside, I think it did show the kind of educational training, the employment outcomes among young people in the global north, I suppose, were exacerbated by policies that fall short overall. So the underlying policies and barriers that young people face and inequality they face. And I suppose, as I said, many of these are structural issues predate the global pandemic. And I suppose then young people in the global south are impacted by a more persistent precarity and less access to regular wages and salaries. And I suppose they have to face not just the issues that young people in the global north are facing, but also, I suppose, the economic legacy of colonialism, and I suppose just the exploitation of the neoliberal era, and I suppose, and then there's also the trade and the tariff rules that are imposed by the global north that make matters worse in many cases for the global south. So I suppose we thought today really was an opportunity to look at how can the global youth worker lens offer us a way to consider the experiences of young people in both the global north and the global south. And I suppose what can we learn from one another? And as Leo has said, we have those who are active in youth workers and young people involved in youth activism here in the global north, but also in Ireland. And obviously then we have Clement, who's going to speak to us from Malawi, and kind of give that perspective, which I think is very valuable. So I'm going to introduce maybe our first speaker, and I suppose really in the first instance, maybe if they could talk about what they see as the impacts, what are the challenges and impacts on young people trying to access decent work. And I suppose what we mean by decent work, I suppose, is really things like having a kind of a consistent set of working times. I mean, certainly when I started work many years ago, maybe the wages weren't great and the salaries weren't great, but you kind of knew you were going to have the 35 or the 30-hour week or the 39-hour week. You kind of knew you were going to have a job from, that was going to start on at 8 o'clock in the morning and finish at 5 o'clock. Many young people don't have that luxury anymore. We have this kind of precarious employment where people are on if and when contracts. So I suppose that's a challenge. And then there's obviously just very poor conditions in terms of the work they're doing. And obviously then the salary and the wages are still quite low. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker, and that's Sinead Harris. And Sinead Harris is manager of CrossCare's Ronatown Youth Service, and has been involved in youth work from a young age, first as a participant, and she graduated through the ranks of junior leader to vice president of our local youth club. And she went on then to study in Maynooth in youth and community work. And obviously, actually, I studied with Sinead a couple of years ago on a course we were both doing. And she has been, I suppose, working as a professional in youth work for the last 17 years in a paid capacity. And she also continues to volunteer on various youth and community projects of interest, and she's currently chair of CCRYS in Bluebell Youth. So I'm going to hand over the floor to Sinead, who's going to kick us off, if that's okay. Sinead, thanks very much. Yep.
Thanks, James. I was thrown into this at the deep end, thanks to Leo yesterday about 3 o'clock. So I've no big speech prepared, whatever. I'm just going to speak from kind of my experience so far, and probably over the last year or so with COVID. So Leo gave me a couple of questions, so I have a couple of things wrote down. So to frame kind of the conversation, I'll read out kind of the question or the statement so you kind of get an idea of where I'm coming from. So the first part was, has COVID-19 impacted on the lives of young people and their work prospects and experiences? So yes, would be the answer. And in particular, I think people that are have already been isolated or disadvantaged in the past have been further isolated and disadvantaged over the last 1.5 to 2 years with COVID. It has led to a huge amount of anxiety amongst young people. So it's a real issue. So if you can't get out of the bed or even manage to turn on your laptop to do an online class at school or college, the prospect of you trying to get a job is miles away, and is unreachable for some of the young people we've been working with lately. Not being in school for long periods and not having access online or not even being confident to go online, as I've already said. Stuck at home, not developing any social skills or practical skills. That leads to you not having the confidence to even put a CV together. What do you put in your CV? How do you make your CV look good? Young people don't know how to talk about themselves in a positive way. So it's very hard for them to put something positive down on a CV, or to even think, no one's going to look at this, I'm brutal, or I've no experiences, or I don't have the confidence to even hand a CV into a shop. Sure, they're not going to look at it. They're going to see me address where I live. That has an impact. No one in my family has worked before. How am I going to work? I don't know how to do this. These are all the things that we're coming up against when we're speaking to young people. The other part of that is the lack of opportunity during COVID. There was no opportunity to apply for jobs. So nobody was taken on. And in the media recently, even around the entertainment industry and the hospitality industry, the lack of respect that's shown to people that are in those industries makes young people think that nobody really does care, if they go into these professions, or if they're looking for jobs. So they've had, even with fourth year placements, or if you're doing LCA and you'd have the opportunity to do some sort of work experience, that hasn't happened for young people over the last 2 years. Same with college placements, a lot of them are online. It's very hard to get a real view or a passion if you're kind of online and you're not actually in a building face to face with people and learning on the ground. So that's been a big issue. And then the other question was around, what does the future of work look like for young people in Ireland? And I suppose at the moment there's a lot of seasonal jobs. People had seen them being advertised, all the retail outlets are looking for people, and they mainly take on young people. Again, they're not sure, as James was talking about, will they have 2 hours, will they have 3 hours? What would the rate of pay be? If they're under 18, it can be, a lesser rate of pay. So there's all those factors to take into account. And then come January, they're not going to want them anymore. And how does that make a young person feel when they get 3 or 4 weeks coming up to Christmas, get a few bob, and then in January they're they don't want me anymore. Was I not good at that? Why don't they want me? And currently we don't know what's going to happen, if there's going to be another lockdown. So there's all that fear building again amongst young people. And then I have to say, apprenticeships for us, before pre-COVID, a lot of young people were taking on apprenticeships, probably that were leaving school early or that had even completed their leaving cert, electricians, plumbers, and they're getting the opportunity to travel with that. So they're getting the opportunity to maybe go to Holland or parts of England, with big companies to carry out their apprenticeships. And that was really positive. But obviously that stopped during COVID. So we don't know if that's going to resume again. A lot of young people lost their apprenticeships because there was nothing for them to do. So builders couldn't keep them on. So I think the MICI might look at that whole apprenticeship piece again, because it was really working. It was giving real opportunity to young people. And that's kind of fallen by the wayside. I even don't hear it being mentioned in the media or at government level anymore. So maybe we can look at that again. And then they're unsure of what the future holds. We talk about this lost generation. Will they be heavily taxed in the future? Climate change is big at the moment. What impact will that have on job opportunities for young people in the future? And will they have the skills to do the jobs? They've missed out on so much. So trying to build up their confidence or build up their skills base, whether that be social skills or practical skills, do they think they have that to go forward and to apply for jobs into the future? And then we just don't know, I suppose, what's going to happen. And there's a real fear around that. So, and also that the current systems are failing a number of young people. So we've seen during COVID how the education system has failed an awful lot of young people that would maybe not have the opportunities or the infrastructure to be able to go online. family situations at home made it impossible for some young people to go online, whether there's an awful lot living in your household, or you could have been a carer at home, you could have been left behind in your younger brothers or sisters. And also the care system, like, kind of went to bed over the last 2 years. So, trying to get in touch with someone, a social worker from Tusla, trying to get in touch with any mental health supports for young people has been virtually impossible over the last 2 years. So you're dealing with that kind of lost generation, the last 2 years. It's just adding all the time to whenever a young person might see the prospect of getting a job into the future. And in some communities, is the life of crime a better opportunity? It's very lucrative. Like where I work out in North Dundalk, and there is a drug economy. It's easy to get into. It's lucrative. And that's what young people see. They don't see in 5 years' time or 10 years' time what path that might lead them down or what implications that might have for their families. But at the moment, that's a job opportunity, and families are happy to accept the money that comes from that kind of an economy in some communities. So leading then on to how has COVID exposed underlying inequalities in the lives of young people? Yes, it has highlighted the reliance of on social welfare, and particularly in a lot of families that there's a lack of role modeling. So in some households, social welfare is the main breadwinner and has always been. So it's generational. So they don't know what it's like to see somebody to work, because they've no role models around seeing someone getting up, going out, having a job, and the prospects that come with having a job and what you can gain from having a job. They're just caught in this trap of being dependent on the state for social welfare. And also a lot of young people have been stuck at home childminding. So the inequalities around access to childcare and all that kind of stuff has also been highlighted during the last year and a half. And jobs in retail, as I said, the entertainment industry can be looked down on as not being proper jobs or real jobs. We'd have a lot of young people that play instruments or that sing, and that would be looking for a career in music in the future. And they're kind of being a bit disheartened over the last year and a half, because they're people don't take us seriously. They think we're a joke. We want to sing or we want to play music for a living. That's not a real job. So we're kind of hung up on what is a real job, or what's seen as a proper job or a job for life. And it's trying to change that and to recognize that young people's dreams and aspirations and goals are very valued, but they're not taken into account, or they're not given any weight. They're kind of laughed off at sometimes when a young person says they want to have a particular career. Maybe they don't get the support from their family, because they're oh, that's not a real job. And so, as the youth sector, we need to look at that. Some young people, they just need to get a job to provide for the family. So having a career prospect or looking into the future isn't an option. They have to just do what they need to do there and then. So what's going to bring home money tomorrow? What can I do to get a job that's going to bring money home tomorrow? So that can lead to them in a couple of years kind of still working in the local shop. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but they have goals in their head, but no one is able to help them to achieve those goals. And how do they get there? Because they have to just keep on providing this money every week to the family home. Also a lack of support at home. Family situations can be very difficult. So for some young people, they're kind of left on their own, and they have to provide for themselves. So there's no support for them. They're stuck in their own community as well. We would notice that an awful lot. Some young people never leave the community in which they grow up in. So they don't know what's on the other side of the boundaries, or how to get a bus to somewhere else within, even though we're in Dublin, we're in North Dundalk, and it's a very urban area. Well, you'd be surprised when you speak to young people that they've never gone outside the boundaries of Dundalk, and Liffey Valley is probably the furthest they'll get to. There's a fear around going outside of their own community. So that leads to lack of opportunities as well for them in accessing other jobs, because where do they go to get access to jobs if they won't even leave their own community? And that can be generational as well, because some families never leave this community. they might go on a holiday or something, or they might have never gone on a holiday. They might go, like we often bring young people down to Glendalough, and they've never been to Glendalough, and you're like, you know, it's only an hour away from Dublin. It's so beautiful, like they've never seen anything like this before. So I was thinking that might be something that we could compare with the global south as well, like not leaving your community or not having the opportunity to leave your community. And even during COVID, like young people didn't have the opportunity to go anywhere, like, you know, travel was restricted, like, you know, so you were stuck. And some young people are comfortable now in that. They're comfortable in just in their own little space and don't want to leave it. And also, there's been a huge lack of support around mental health options for young people during the last year and a half. And I think if we don't look at that, and if we don't put in support around that, we're never going to get young people to a stage where they can feel confident enough to go and apply for a job, and to be able to go and sit in an interview, or to be able to keep applying for jobs, even though they might get rejected and stuff, but how to take that rejection, how to be able to cope with that, how to be able to cope with like, you know, constructive criticism. If you do go into a job and you're told, you know, you didn't do that great today, maybe tomorrow you might do this. For some young people, that makes them just leave a job, like, you know, because they don't want to go back again tomorrow. So I think there needs to be a real look at mental health and around young people, and how we can build them back up again to be able to reach a level and to reach their own goals. The other part of that Leo, we were looking at was that the impact or the aftermath for years to come on young people. So what policies, actions will be put in place to future-proof for young people? Like, I don't know where to start with that. I think it's massive. I think there's like a huge job on our hands ahead of us for all of us involved kind of in the youth sector, around how we just build back up that resilience and capacity in young people to go forward, to look towards the future. Because at the moment, when you speak to some young people, they don't know what the future is going to look like. They're afraid, I think, to think about what the future could actually look like, because the pandemic is still ongoing. There's more talks of lockdowns. Are they going to be back at home school? And all these kind of things are coming into play again. And then the impact on friendship groups and family relationships. Like, if you don't have the basics, if you don't have that support network, it's very hard for you then to get out of that space and to apply for jobs or to look to the future. So I also think that a lot of young people think that society has disrespected them over the last year and a half. That, you know, media stuff earlier on in the year towards young people during the pandemic, the coverage was kind of biased and unfair, and that it was not all young people, and that an awful lot of young people have stayed at home, have tried to protect themselves and protect their families, and they're not getting any recognition for that either. So they don't feel valued, I think, by society at the moment. So I think that's me. If anyone has any questions, I hope I made some sense there. That was kind of just a last minute thing, but yeah, that's me, James.
Thanks a million. I was thinking if you had less than 24 hours to put all that together, but I think it would. I was just taking notes here during your presentation. I was just kind of thinking you really hit on so many issues. So thank you so much. I mean, I was just thinking you talked about the lack of opportunities for young people. And that's so true. You know, the learning loss. I mean, when you're young, you want to take up opportunities, and COVID has really prevented that. I think you talked about the work experience issue, which is so important. And you also mentioned just around the fact that some employers are taking people on now for a couple of weeks, and just the environment is. I mean, people, like, we get calls from journalists saying, why aren't young people taking up X opportunities or Y opportunities? And we're saying, look, the rates of pay are very low. It's a very different world now, even in terms of working. I mean, if some people saw a video there online, the abuse that some retail frontline staff are getting from people about masks, and it's just a lot more complicated. I think you talked about the rates of pay, and you rightly highlighted the fact that 40% of young people are 40% of those on the minimum wage are under 25, and young people under certain ages are on lower rates than the normal minimum wage. And apprenticeships, I really agree with that. There's work that needs to be done there. So you really well done. You gave us. There'll probably be loads of questions later on. I certainly took loads of notes. I mean, I think you've really covered a really comprehensive overview of the really many issues. So thank you so much for that brilliant start. Rather than me kind of go through all that now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce our next speaker, because I suppose you want to hear from all our speakers today. So our next speaker is Lavina O'Reilly, and Lavina is a youth instructor at the Youth Training and Development Centre in Newbridge. Lavina entered the youth sector as a young person in a local youth project and found a love of youth work there. After finishing her level 8 degree with IT Carlow, she took on a role with Kildare Youth Service, and throughout this role, Lavina has delivered a broad range of personal, social and educational programs to support young people to reach their full potential. Lavina has a strong interest in sexual health and reproductive health rights for women and girls, and attended the Nairobi Summit in 2019. And Lavina has also attended a seminar engaging women in politics and entrepreneurship. So Lavina, I'll give you the floor. So thank you again for agreeing to participate this morning. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Sinead, that was absolutely fantastic. I was like, I feel like everything that I have to say is really going to relate to what you have said. So it just shows that not only in Clondalk and in the Dublin area, we're actually seeing the same kind of issues coming from the more rural areas in Kildare. So I got two groups together today to just kind of ask them a couple of questions this morning. And because you know the way sometimes you kind of, overall what's kind of going on, but it's really kind of good to ask the group, what do you actually think of what's happening? So I just threw it out there. I asked them, what are the impacts on access and work for young people? And one of the things actually that came up that I'd completely forgotten about, because I thought it was like my age group problem. So they talked about the lack of housing and being able to they had dreams, to go working in Dublin and that kind of thing, but knowing that there's no way they'll be able to get anywhere to stay in Dublin, and also that the cost of transport getting from Newbridge to Dublin is actually quite expensive, because we're on the commuter line, but we're out of the short hop zone. So you're talking 250 euros a month kind of to get to Dublin. So that can be a lot out of their wages if they are on low wage. They also started talking about, and this is actually a cycle. So do you know the way they were saying it's difficult to get in a job? But then they were talking about how difficult it is to get on the road because the prices of insurance. So they're talking about not having anywhere to stay, not being able to get on the road with insurance to actually drive to get to work. So what's happened is they're actually becoming in a poverty trap. And it's kind of something that I thought I'm 30, and I thought that the whole housing thing would have been a problem at my age. But to think that there's 15 and 16-year-olds telling me that they're worried about not getting somewhere to live if they want to get a job is way beyond their years to be thinking about that and to have that kind of on their shoulders, which can definitely bring on, lots of anxieties and worries of what their kind of future will bring. So that kind of took me a little bit back this morning from them, because they're babies, and looking at their little faces having to worry about stuff like that was kind of difficult to hear. But yeah, so when we got on to talking about work experience, so during the pandemic, or when we locked down firstly in March 2019 or 20, are we 20? It feels like it's so long now. I was working directly with young people in the Kildare Youth Service, and we used to have the likes of 50, 60 young people coming up to us every single night randomly, but obviously that all stopped, and a lot of our young people didn't have access to the likes of laptops, or like what Sinead was saying, like a safe place to kind of go online that wasn't chaotic. So what happened was because it was targeted youth work that we were doing, because we were in like a disadvantaged area from Pobble, and they were actually talking about not being able to go online. So we lost the guts of our whole targeted young people. So we didn't see them for a whole year. So the connection and the relationships that we had built throughout that time were just completely lost. And it was very, very difficult, because their motivation, their confidence, and they were probably embarrassed to tell us they didn't have access to computers, or that their house wasn't equipped, with internet and that kind of stuff. And the way the phones are, one week that have a phone, then the next they don't have a phone. So very, very hard to kind of keep in touch with them. So I think when I moved over to the Youth Training Development Centre, I kind of seen a more kind of a supportive thing. And I know that I think it was because it was more like an education perspective. But in here, we have access to a counsellor on site. So it kind of made young people, you know, more supported throughout that time, is that they had it as part of like their module as such. So as part of the wellbeing program. So they did have more access in the training centre. And it kind of kept them going throughout the time. Now I know some of them did get an extension now to do to stay on for an extra year, but a lot of their confidence and their motivation was kind of gone. But now I'm here a couple of months and we're seeing a massive increase in young people looking as early school leavers who wanting to drop out of school because they've lost a whole year. So say, for example, we would have done this program, Stepping Stones program, I'd say probably as if someone would be aware of it, where we kind of prepped people going into school and stuff around confidence, making new friends. But for the year and a half, we didn't get a chance to do that. So they weren't prepped going into secondary school, so they didn't know what was happening. So we're actually seeing now the amount of young people who are trying to come into the early school leaving before they've done their junior cert, which wouldn't really have been as common before in the training centre. It would have been normal they get their junior cert and then they come in here afterwards. But it's starting that little bit earlier now, we're seeing in here. But yeah, so I was talking then to the rest of the group today, which is kind of be the older ones, and they were saying that they can't talk to people now. They find it really, really difficult to actually talk to someone. Like, so we're nearly practicing how to greet people and stuff. So that can definitely like link into not having enough confidence to apply for jobs, which can actually like, you know, really, really lose their confidence. And then it can, you know, bring negative impacts then on them, on their self-esteem as well. A lot of them actually talked about like being depressed, being not able to go and look for jobs. So it, like COVID really, really is having like a massive impact on the young people. And even with their work experience. So we would have had a lot of young people in the training centre who would have been signed up to do some work experience and they just never got an opportunity to do it. But in here now, we're really, really lucky in the sense
Lavina, have we lost you?
do work experience nearly
back.
on site. Where that's an advantage to other people who actually don't have that on the outside. So yeah, it's very, very difficult. I think I'm still on track, or I'm actually probably going off onto something else. So they were also talking about jobs not being secure and stuff, and jobs that they thought were the be all and end all actually aren't. And a lot of that stuff came up, Sinead, as well, around, oh, you know, wanting to get in bands and wanting to do bar work and all that kind of stuff within the hospitality sector is kind of not as secure as it would have been previous. And I know some of the jobs as well are actually given really low pay for young people. And a lot of them that were working in like coffee shops and stuff had left because they were getting the COVID payment and they were happy kind of enough on that. So that's kind of a lot of the information that the young people had kind of given here. But I think now that we're going to definitely see more kind of struggles for them trying to access kind of jobs outside of the town and trying to get to Dublin and stuff. And a lot of it would be linked back to the lack of transport and the lack of housing. So that's kind of everything that they gave to me this morning.
Lavina, that's brilliant. Thanks very much. I mean, you've really given us they're really great insights. And I suppose, like, yeah, you're right, housing and accommodation are such huge issues for young people. And as you said, yeah, you know, at 16, 17, 18, people are worried about
they're just babies, yeah.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned the public transport issue. There is that catch-22 that, okay, I know there's now maybe greater opportunities in rural areas and obviously towns like Newbridge maybe, but still a lot of the jobs are in the bigger urban areas like Dublin and stuff, and just that catch-22 whereby, you know, you can't afford to live in Dublin, even though you maybe want that. and then the actual cost to get into Dublin, either, and the rest of the public transport routes don't always, if you have a job, you have to be there on time, and the public transport routes don't always get you there on time. And then I'm just thinking from a climate action point of view, it's not good that everybody's driving a car, but if it's the only opportunity you have to get to a job, that's an issue. And I think you talked about the work experience, and that's such a good point. I mean, there was I suppose, a kind of a expectation that everybody had access to both good broadband, maybe you had equipment like a laptop, and also then had a space, as you said, somewhere private, in their house, and a lot of people didn't have that. And I think you really raised an important point, and just about the job security and the fact that there is low pay, and that's such a big issue. So I mean, I know I probably just there's probably other points you made as well that I've just missed out on, but I really do think you've given us really a good insights into some of the issues that are impacting on young people, particularly in the area of employment. So thanks a million for that. Really appreciate it. And hopefully, I think we'll have time for questions later on. So people have other questions, as well. That'd be great. So thanks a million, Lavina. So now I'd like to very much welcome Clement, who's joining us here this morning as well from Malawi. Clement, you're very, very welcome. If you're ready to go, I'm just going to introduce you, and then we're going to have you speak. So Clement, 1 second here now. I'll just Clement is director of the Young Politicians Union, and he's also a TV and radio presenter. He's a youth worker, and he's also an advocate for youth rights, climate justice. And as I said, he's joining us this morning from Malawi. The magic of technology, that we can have people from all over the world. Clement, we really thank you for joining us. And so the floor is yours. Thanks very much. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Truly joining this very good conversation from Malawi, which is the smallest country so far in the Southern Africa, which also had some impacts as regard to COVID-19. Maybe I'll take the first question, or you need to direct me in terms of the flow of the discussion.
Yeah, if you want to take the first question, yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, in Malawi, young people again were affected with COVID-19, more especially as regard to access to a decent work. In terms of the proportion of young people, we are the majority. Over 62% are young people, and these are young people that are ready to go in various industries, trained with different skills to venture into a different job market. Unfortunately, with the COVID-19, things didn't go well. So I would highlight a few impacts that we noticed in Malawi. One, I think, issues of mental health rose amongst young people. These are young people that are just graduating from universities and different colleges in various aspects, but to access the actual job based on the training that they were trained in could not happen because, one, companies were closing down because of COVID-19. One, some companies did not make profits, and two, they had to scale down their human resource because in times of COVID-19, there were some restrictions in terms of gathering, in terms of movement. So the production again which and we saw young people going down in mental issues. Recently, we've just recorded a number of cases of suicide, more especially on young people. And we had a discussion, civil society, but also the government. We saw that I think this was coming also from the perspective of COVID-19, which affected their families and also affected themselves as individuals. So in terms of access to decent work in Malawi, I think the COVID-19 really impacted young people. When it comes to decent work, we in Malawi, we are not only looking at being employed, but we were also looking at capacity of young people employing themselves in decent works. That again was impacted. Nothing happened during the COVID-19 because the entrepreneurial sector was also affected. So young people that had an idea, that had proposals, that have an idea in terms of how to start a business, also could not implement such kind of ideas, despite that they had that vision and they have the capacity. But based on the restrictions, based on the number of people that were gathering together, these young people could not also go ahead to implement the ideas in terms of setting up the businesses or setting up the companies after graduating from the colleges. Yeah, I just saw that my video went off. Secondly, or thirdly, I would also want to say that in Malawi, access to decent work more and more is becoming challenging because of a number of factors as well. One, the job market is too slim. The government, because of the issues of wage bill, is not employing many people, many graduates that are graduating from different colleges and universities. So I would say it becomes a problem for young people to access the decent work in Malawi based on the sectors that are recruiting young people. We have the sector, the health sector, which has a lot of vacancies, but because of the wage bill, young people are not being employed. The graduates are not being employed by the government. We have the educational sector. It has also a lot of vacancies. Teacher-pupil ratio is too far from our policies, which recommended that a teacher should be able to teach less than 60 people. Currently, a teacher can go as far as teaching 120, 200 pupils in class. But the government is not able to employ more teachers, despite that these teachers are being trained and also graduating each and every year. But because of issues of wage bill, and also with the COVID-19, the wage bill again seems to be not favoring for the government of Malawi to employ more teachers and employ more health workers. I would stop there first.
Okay, Clement, thank you so much. I mean, I think really you've kind of hit on a number of things. I suppose we definitely experience, certainly from my work in Ireland, you talked about, I suppose, young people who had maybe hopes and dreams before COVID and had hoped to go into the labour market. And then obviously you mentioned companies closing down or they didn't have the profits, and also that's a phenomenon across the world that, young people tend to be, the most recent recruited by companies, and they tend to be if there is a problem, they tend to be the first who lose their jobs. And obviously you mentioned that was an issue in Malawi as well. And, it is very, tough then for young people to deal with that. And you mentioned the mental health difficulties and sadly the suicides that have resulted as a result of that. So it's not just about, employment, it's about life for many of these young people. And I think you definitely hit on, definitely there's many young people who want to become entrepreneurs, as well. You mentioned that. And I think, those opportunities were completely shut off as well, because obviously there was restrictions, there was, less money around, people weren't earning a living. And so it's difficult to set up it's the worst time in any stage to set up a new business in the middle of a global pandemic. And I think you talked then about, and then that's the other challenge you mentioned, not just the private sector was shut down, but the public sector. And you talked about the government. Obviously there was a need for, people, particularly young people, to come into the public sector, but the government don't have the funding to take on new graduates and new young people. So, and that's something, again, I know we've experienced in Ireland where, where it's really, a kind of a vicious cycle. The government doesn't have the money to take on people, so people are unemployed, and then they don't have the money to buy products and services, and it's kind of a negative cycle. So I mean, that's a really I mean, there's a lot of similarities, as I can see, in terms of context, but obviously there are differences, of course, but it's really a very insightful overview of kind of where things are at for young people, and the impact of COVID, particularly on the employment market. So Clement, and we probably have questions for you later on, so thank you so much for that. So I'm going to maybe move on to our final speaker this morning, and that is Callum. And thank you, Callum, again for joining us this morning. So Callum is a 19-year-old from rural County Limerick and recently started studying political science, international relations and sociology at University College Dublin. Sounds a really interesting course, a program. Having joined Scouts at a young age, he has an appreciation for meaningful youth participation, opportunities and empowerment. And this has led to a journey of advocacy and activism on topics from sustainable development to youth rights, with a special focus on ensuring the voice of young people is placed at the forefront of decision making at a local, national and international level. And I know for us, Callum, and I know some people might have heard you've done many great interviews on both national and local radio, I know, in terms of the voice of young people, particularly around the vote 16 issue, but I'm sure you've done on other things, and so a really excellent advocate for making sure that young people are heard at all levels. So Callum, the floor is yours, and thank you again for joining us this morning. Yeah.
Thanks very much, James, for the lovely words, and thanks very much for having me here today. Thanks to Leo for giving me the shout there yesterday to jump on. It's a really cool space to be in with all you guys. And I have to say, firstly, to Sinead, Lavina and Clement, it's been an absolute breath of fresh air to hear everything you've said. As a young person here in Ireland, it's quite hard at sometimes to get your voice heard. So to hear people who support young people bringing that to the forefront and actually saying it is really, really appreciated anyway from my point of view. I suppose in terms of the questions, what impacts on young people accessing decent work? So I think you all hit it very well. I suppose from a rural perspective, you know, I'm from Ballybricken in County Limerick, which is quite rural, and there's limited employment opportunities out there. But the biggest one for me anyway, when I was trying to access work, was transport. And I suppose I'm quite I try to be a climate conscious person, and I was quite young at the time when I tried to start working. So I couldn't start driving yet, so it was constantly trying to find lifts, constantly trying to, like, the bus is non-existent where I live, so it was either onto the parents, onto the grandparents, onto friends, onto neighbours, and it was just that constant burden of, you know, feeling guilty for asking people for lifts all the time, and also trying to balance that with, you know, I do have to work as well. I suppose housing is definitely a big issue. Like, I'm from Limerick, but I'm just after moving up to Dublin, and I've never spent so much time on daft in my life trying to find cheaper accommodation. I think I spent the best part of the last year probably spending more time flicking through adverts for student accommodation than I was studying for my Leaving Cert. Now that's probably not true, but it felt like it at times. I think as well, in terms of accessing decent work, there's a lot of skepticism around I suppose the safety of the work, not in terms of actual harm, but in terms of the long term, like longevity of how long you're actually going to be able to hold a job for. And I think you touched on it really well when you said about you know, young people thinking it's the be all and end all with a job. I worked a job over the summer where I was working nearly 40-50 hours a week inside behind the bar, and I thought it was the be all and end all. And it came to the end of the summer, and sure, there was no need for Caleb to be working behind the bar anymore, because I had to go back to college. Number one, I had to go to college, thankfully, after getting my place. But as well, I think it was a lot the same for a lot of other young people in terms of actually not having the opportunity there. And then when the opportunity was there, it was either in like a low quality situation in terms of the actual quality of employment, and then in terms of the payment and the wage, it's quite low. I think I've seen it more full on while I've been up here. Dublin is that bit more expensive than Limerick, but I think in terms of the accommodation, like managing paying my rent, managing paying, you know, simple things like going groceries, and then thankfully with things opening up a small bit, I've got to go out with friends every now and then, and it's been crazy trying to work to try and balance that. Never mind actually save, just balance. I think the confidence aspect is a massive barrier to work. In terms of accessing work, and I think the mental health, the overall mental health conversation, but more so, you know, we've seen the specific issues of actual availability of mental health services for young people during the COVID-19 pandemic and even before that. But I think as well, just general well-being across the youth population of Ireland. And we've seen, like, in schools, the RSC curriculum at the minute isn't up to standard to support young people. The supports in schools are really limited, and we've seen obviously that there's a kind of in educational settings at the minute, it's all that bit more separated and split up with COVID, and that there's these extra procedures that kind of make it that bit less impersonal, and it's harder. So I think that's where youth organizations and youth work play a major role in connecting with young people. I think in terms of, has COVID impacted on the lives of young people and their work prospects and experiences? Definitely. I think before we even talk about COVID-19, we have to mention that before COVID-19, the young people were impacted. If we look at some recent research done by the ESRI, the Economic and Social Research Institution of Ireland, that our generation, my generation, is the first generation since this foundation of the state to be less well off than the generation before us. And I think when we look at that mixed with all the issues between that I named earlier in terms of access and work, like housing, that it's a worrying sight, and it's kind of a bleak sight trying to plan a future here. And when we look at employment, trying to plan, you know, filling out your CAO form to set yourself up for a few years in college and then hopefully get a job out of it, coming out of it, looking at it and saying that you're going to be worse off than your parents, you're worse off than your grandparents. There's a really limited job market, there's a really limited housing market, and that the cost of living in Ireland is just growing and growing. So I think before COVID, that was a big impact in terms of work prospects. But I think because of COVID, it highlighted a major disparity in Irish society in terms of, number one, how young people were looked at, and number two, how young people were treated. So in terms of how young people were looked at, I think we were very easily, you know, cast aside or used as the battering ram when it came to government negligence in terms of restrictions, and that, you know, maybe the 95% of young people were forgotten about when the 5% acted out of hand. And that was hard, I know, for me and for a lot of other young people who were, like, at the time in the height of the pandemic, I was studying for a leaving cert that I didn't know was going to happen or not, which eventually did, thankfully. But it was different, and that definitely had an impact on everyone's mental health, I know. But in terms of directly work prospects and experiences, you know, young people are proportionately more likely to be working in hospitality sector, and in sectors that were heavily hit during the pandemic and that were closed, so that, you know, those spaces that the work prospects during the COVID-19 pandemic were near non-existent, and it was really hard for young people to find jobs, especially in rural areas. What does the future of work look like in Ireland and in Malawi for young people? I was over in COP26 actually only 2 weeks back, and I met a lovely Malawian minister, Nancy Tembo, and she spoke about the need for climate justice, but more so that we can't achieve climate action without eradicating poverty and ensuring that everyone's off the streets and in homes and has a job. And that really hit me, and that was on my first day over at COP, and it kind of set the tone for me and made me realize that, you know, we can't have climate action and we can't have these big conversations around policy without actually realizing the issues on our streets, and actually supporting people to be able to access jobs, to be able to access education, to be able to have a house over their home and a warm meal. So I thought that was just my nice link to Malawi that I've had over recently. But in terms of the future of work, like I've always tried to say it, in terms of having young people in decision-making spaces, I've been lucky to be involved over the last couple of years in a few as well, that it's not just youth representation, it's youth energy, youth innovation, youth creativity that really sparks the change. And I think in terms of the future of work, I think that our generation, the next generation, bring so much, bring just a major sense of innovation and change to an industry that I think is that it's very much needed to, I suppose, the world of work. And I think that, you know, in terms of the global north and the global south, I think there's a lot of work to do to understand how we can fully and best support across the globe. Because, you know, if we look at the Sustainable Development Goals and we link back to the 2030 agenda, the fundamental principle is leaving no one behind, and that we can't move forward as a world, and we can't meet these targets without ensuring that everyone is with us. So I think it's really important that we delve deeper, especially in terms of employment opportunities, the link between the global north and the global south. And then finally, how has COVID-19 exposed underlying inequalities on the lives of young people and work prospects and experiences? Like I said, it's highlighted major disparities in how young people are looked at and how they're treated in the media and I suppose in society as a whole. And it's been really interesting to start studying sociology and actually looking at how it is actually being framed and I suppose that aspect of it. But in terms of how young people are actually treated, it's highlighted so much more in terms of we've actually seen that, you know, now students have been cut off the PUP payment, which has been a lifeline to, I know, a lot of my friends and a lot of people across, a lot of young people across Ireland, where, you know, it was cut down from that initial rate to now be non-existent, going back on normal welfare schemes. And I know during the pandemic, that was, like I said, like a lifeline. But as well, it was a lifeline for families that, you know, I know a lot of my friends had been working on farms, and a lot of that was impacted because of the transport. But I know a lot of my friends had been working inside in restaurants and inside in pubs, along with myself. And during the pandemic, it was one of the main income lines for a lot of families. And then in terms of just the work prospects and experiences in terms of inequalities, I think we like I said, like young people had been given the kind of not the lowest employment opportunities, because, you know, at the end of the day, I think James touched on it. I think you said it very well, that, you know, we can't expect, like, we don't expect to be coming in as CAOs of companies or anything. It's just that, you know, that we'd like to have a wage that that could support us, I suppose, a living wage in rather than a minimum wage. So I think that's mostly everything. And yeah, like, again, if you have any questions, I'd love to answer them, and thanks so much for the opportunity and inviting me into the space to chat about this.
Yeah, Callum, thanks very much. Definitely, you've covered a huge number of issues there. I mean, I talked about, again, you know, I know Davina mentioned that just the transport issue is a big issue for young people, and I think in some respects, government expects, when you turn 18, government kind of treats you as an adult and says, now, you know, you need to be independent and autonomous. And then, you know, to get on the road as an, you know, as a individual, we're obviously have to be climate conscious, I suppose, in terms of we don't want everybody to be in cars. But then if you're in a rural area, how do you get to work, and how do you get to work on time, and how do you get home at a decent hour? And that's why public transport is such a big issue. And you talked about the low quality of employment and issues around confidence and mental health. And I think supporting young people, because I think it was, as mentioned earlier on as well, I think in terms of supporting young people, the job search can be demoralizing and demotivating, you know, and can be really challenging. And I suppose supporting young people in the current environment, maybe where they're getting a lot of rejection, but I suppose, and that's where I suppose where youth workers and youth organizations come in to give young people hope and confidence and motivation around that, and say, look, you use every opportunity as a learning opportunity, you know, even if you don't get the job, what did I learn from that kind of job search, and what did I learn? Get the interview, maybe learn from the interview. I mean, it is very stark, as you've mentioned, you know, that the ESRI report, kind of young people, this generation being less well off than others, and that is certainly, you know, not a good thing here. And obviously, you mentioned then the global aspect, obviously, which is this seminar this morning, really webinar around the COP26, and really about, you know, trying to ensure that everybody has not just a decent job, but has decent housing and can put food on the table and whatever. And that's linked, I think you talked about the cost of living. And I suppose for young people, they have fixed income and low income. And so the cost of living inflation is now increasing again. It's now 5% at the moment. That's a big issue. But I did like the bit and I think you did mention a really, really important point, which I think we do need to recognize, that young people bring the ideas, they bring the energy, they bring the innovation, and they bring the creativity into many workplaces. And employers and organizations, and including civil societies, they lose out when young people aren't in the labor market and aren't in places of employment. And so I think that's really important. So I suppose I'm going to stop there. I could probably go on for another half an hour talking about all your 4 contributions that Sinead, Lavina, Clement, and Callum made, because this is an area that I've worked in a long time. But this webinar is not for me, so I'm going to shut up now, and I'm going to throw the floor open to colleagues maybe who've been listening to really great presentations to ask questions. And if maybe you could just say your name and maybe just where you're from, and just then if you want to pose the question to all the panel or to a particular panelist, maybe if that would be great. So use I think as Leo has already put it in the chat, maybe to put your hand up and ask a question. So the floor is yours. Who wants to go first? It's always hard to get the first question. I know that. And then once you get the first question, they kind of flow a little bit.
James, I have a question for Clement.
Cool.
Because he mentioned mental health in Malawi, and we've also mentioned mental health here in Ireland and the impacts that's having on young people. And some of the main topic around mental health has been anxiety and that kind of stuff. I'm just wondering, is it the same issues, Clement, for you over there? What are young people presenting with in regards to mental health?
You did break up at the end of your question. Maybe would you mind if you can repeat? I captured the whole sentence, but I think towards the end you were breaking up.
What issues are young people facing around mental health? What's presenting for you?
Oh, okay, right. So specifically, young people are going through depression. I think that's one of the key outcome, which is coming there because of mental health. After getting frustration that they are not being employed, both in the private sector and public sector, and these are young people that are over 25 years and they have nothing to do. The living standard is going high. They're still being in their parents' house, whose parents are also struggling to raise the family and to feed the family because the economy also is going down. And again, with COVID-19, some of the parents again were shut down from their work. They were told to go because during the COVID, they could not make, companies could not make profits. So depression, I think, has been the very outcome that has been facing young people in Malawi as a result of the mental health issues. This is something that we engage the Ministry of Health. Unfortunately, I think as Malawi government is much far from where we would confidently say we are ready to deal with issues of mental health in Malawi, because we assessed the expertise which can deal with mental health. We are much far from the human resource that can adequately address issues of mental health and provide psychosocial counseling and support to young people. Secondly, still the government is not coming out very clearly. Fortunately and unfortunately, we are in the government which is just coming in from the 2020 elections, which was a rerun kind of elections, which promised a lot of work, 1 million jobs per year, but that have not happened. We quizzed the government to come out very clear in terms of the past 1 year, how many young people have been employed. They are not coming up with statistics and data that will back up that they have employed young people, which means we still have the mental health phase amongst young people. If the government is not coming up with the statistics and data in terms of how many young people last and how many, again, give us some hopes. To look at what's the future looks like in terms of work in Malawi. As a civil society, as someone who speaks for young people in Malawi, I think there's an opportunity for young people in terms of job creation and job opportunities, because we just launched what we call Malawi 2063, which is a vision that will take us from 2021 to 2063. In there are 3 pillars. The first pillar is agricultural commercialization and industrialization. The second pillar is looking at commercialization. The third pillar is looking at urbanization. And when we look at agricultural productivity and commercialization alone, productivity alone as first pillar, poses a lot of opportunities. If we can strategically engage young people, if we can strategically empower young people to go green, invest in green economy, as we scale up development in Malawi. Looking at again pillar number 3, which is urbanization of the Malawi 2063, which is a development blueprint. I also see more jobs created in local communities, because the urbanization aspect looks at creating urban centers, towns within the communities to reduce the number of young people that are moving from the rural areas into town to search for greener pasture. So to me, I think the future looks good in terms of a job, but I think we need strategic engagement and strategic awareness and the popularization of the document, but also engaging young people specifically that are in different entrepreneurship background, so that we can deepen and strengthen the system of entrepreneurship, but also making sure that we sustain and retain the economy to make sure the young people are operating their businesses and some companies in a situation and a condition where their business will be growing.
Thank you.
Clement, thanks very much for that.
Yeah.
Okay, and thanks, Sinead, for posing the question. Anybody else want to raise a question, pose a question?
I have a question. Hello,
Yeah, Laura, yeah, work away, yeah.
Yeah, how are you? This is actually for Callum, and I'm going to kind of stay on the same kind of topic that Sinead brought up there as well. But I suppose from, like, we could all look from the outside in during COVID, but I think for particularly the Leaving Cert and first year, going into first year college, during COVID was obviously particularly, like, it's a stressful time anyway. But Callum, you mentioned just around mental health, and you know, I'm sure you all kind of struggled during those 2 years. But from your perspective, what do you think, what resources do you think could have been implemented or provided for young people during this time?
Thanks so much, Laura. This is a brilliant question. And yes, like it was really difficult for young people across the board. I know a lot of people that I would have been quite close with who had never shown any signs of any mental illnesses ended up being diagnosed with something or needing extra support. And I think we all across the board needed extra support during COVID. I know I did as well. But I think for young people, it's an interesting one, because it's trying to find that level of engagement that is like meaningful but really easy for us to access, if you get me. So what I found during it all was I was trying to like have conversations, and I remember I held like a Zoom call like this with like people in my school year, and people didn't turn on their cameras, didn't want to do that at all. So I was like, okay, that didn't work. I tried it a few times. What am I supposed to do? I started like trying it with different things. Okay, we might try it on like Messenger chat or whatever. It didn't work either. And then I hosted, I just said I'd give it a go, and I hosted an Instagram live with someone who I'd been chatting with, who was a really, really cool mental health activist. And people loved it. They thought it was brilliant because they didn't have to show their face. They could ask a question if they wanted. It wouldn't even come up that they were actually in the session to anyone except me. And it was a really easy avenue for them to engage. So I went on and I hosted like an Instagram live series of about 6 or 7 episodes called Sure I'm Grand. And it was all around, like, breaking down the conversation of, it's so easy for us to be like, text our friends during COVID being like, how are you getting on? And it's sure, I'm grand. So for me, what worked in terms of supporting other people and supporting myself, and in terms of the conversation around mental health, in like a nice and enjoyable and informative way, it was through holding these kind of informal conversations online where people could join in and leave as they wished. But then I suppose that's a very kind of general support. And I suppose in terms of direct supports, I know for me it was like I think there was some of the teachers, not even the designated. That was the funny thing. We had a funny conversation about it one day in school, where it wasn't even the designated teachers who were like the well-being teachers were the best at talking to us about mental health. It was just the kind of flippant conversations that you'd have with a teacher walking out of a classroom, or at the end of a Zoom call, or at the start of a Zoom call. It was like the small things, and that, like, if everyone had a kind of general kind of consciousness of that, some people might be really struggling, and that everyone does their bit to reach out and ask people, that can have a massive, like a ripple effect in terms of, people will actually reach out and get the support, or they'll know where to get the support. So yeah, I think it finally then was people actually knowing where to get the support was the big one. That was the big one. It wasn't actually knowing the reliable supports, knowing where you could get support, because it was so hard to find support at the time, and knowing where you could turn when you really needed to. And those graphics with the phone numbers and the social medias and the websites that people could just easily do it in their own time. That's what I found overall. The overall message of those three things is that, that level of self-directed support is massive, because at the end of the day, if someone's just given support and they're not ready for it, then it's not going to help. But if they're empowered and made aware of the supports that are at hand to them, and like kind of supported along that process, that's what I found anyway for a lot of young people, that was really helpful for them during COVID.
Brilliant. Thanks, Emil. It obviously, you found the Instagram live through trial and error. So, fair play to you. Thanks for your answer. Brilliant.
No, thanks a million for the question.
Can
Thanks,
I ask
Colin.
Caleb a question? Oh, sorry.
Yes, yeah, no, fair.
Sorry, yeah, and I apologize. I was so late. I was in another session that just ran over and over, and I just couldn't get out of it. Sorry. So I apologize if this has been covered. First of all, Caleb, I only heard part of your presentation, but you're an exceptional advocate, not just for yourself, but for other people. And I think, you should, and I don't mean to sound patronizing when I say this, you should be exceptionally proud of yourself and what you're achieving. I love to see this in young people, because like you say, so often we hear bad stuff. Yeah, I'm yet to meet a young person that has demonstrated any of the bad stuff. I am always meeting young people just like you, and it really inspires me to do better. And what I'd like then, in the vein of that question, is, we've seen very much a narrative and almost a lexicon within the whole of COVID of you're on mute. And you've said yourself, so many young people, particularly in the kind of teen age group, would prefer to have their screen off. How do we make sure that those young people are being seen and heard by the decision makers, who are very easy to dismiss? How do we make sure that those voices are meaningful, and that they are, not that they are meaningful, but that they're meaningfully included and not just tick boxes? What do you think is missing at the moment?
Yeah, thanks so much, and thanks for your lovely words as well. I really, really appreciate it. I think like I have a general principle when it comes to advocacy and activism, and it's called KISS, and it's keep it simple, stupid, and it's breaking everything, absolutely everything I do, everything I say down, so that, like, everyone from my grandmother to my, maybe not my 5-year-old brother, but my 15-year-old brother can understand. And I think that's how we include everyone. I think in the world of decision making and policy making, and advocating, and that general sphere, that there's a language that makes it quite inaccessible for everyone to engage with. I know in terms of policy making, like at the minute, I'm going in later, I'm doing a chat about COP, and I've had to read through the COP agreement, and it's baffling to see the amount of words that can be used to sum up something so simply. So I think that's the big one, is making everything as understandable and accessible for everyone as possible. in terms of actually engaging those people. So we did a cool project a while back, and it was engaging the unengaged. So people who just didn't care about politics, people who had no awareness, didn't want to have an awareness, didn't want to engage, probably the people who'd post a comment under a post of another young person being like, oh, why are you doing that? Why would you bother? So what we found was that, like, again, through complete trial and error, I tried a load of different things, because I during the Leaving Cert, I was really active on the issue, and I wanted to make sure that I kind of had a quite representative view, because I know I was coming at it from a very like specific slant. And what I found was that, like, social media is such a good tool when it's used correctly and it's used in a safe manner. So everything from, like, the Instagram lives were a really cool area. But obviously not everyone is going to jump onto an Instagram live and listen to it for 15 or 30 minutes. So what I do is I'd always have, like, nearly constantly up on my stories, so whether it's Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, is that I have just every couple of days I'll change up the topic or different things, and I'll just post it up, and I'll leave a box there where anyone can anonymously drop in a question, or drop in an opinion. What I found was there was a lot of people anyway in my school and kind of in my locality who never would have been involved, and would have been those people to keep their cameras off when there was an issue there that might be affecting them and that they might really care about, but they just didn't have the confidence or the care to voice their opinion on it. That's the avenue that a lot of them used, and that it was they ended up actually getting involved. There was a couple of people who got quite involved after that. And I know now as well with social media, there's a major digital divide and not everyone's on social media. But in the kind of COVID world, we've been kind of forced onto this digital world. And I found anyway that keeping it really simple on social media and explaining it and kind of giving a clear and kind of a safe avenue for people to post whatever they like into that, that's been really important. But now moving back to in person, in terms of including everyone, it's really difficult. It's really difficult. And while I've been very used to working with really like engaged people. So when I come out of that sphere, that the thing that I found that's been most helpful in terms of just like talking to friends up here in college who have no interest in climate action and stuff like that is just going into it with an understanding of the other person's side, that like that you can't expect them to be really passionate as well. And I know I'm going on a lot now, so I hope that was okay, Faye. And thanks for the question.
And I'd just like to say I very much look forward to voting for you when you run for Taoiseach.
Thanks very much.
Hey, thanks a million, Colin. Thanks for the comprehensive response. Clement, you want to come back in there, but there's also a question for you from Valerie, which is, if I get it here now, it's in the chat. It's God, it's gone there. You probably see where it was. Let's read it here now. Clement, the question is, what are the main types of jobs, employment for young people, and are they different for young people in urban and rural areas in Malawi? And also there's just a question around, is there financial support from the government for young people that do not have jobs?
Thank you. That's why I raised the hand for me to come in. I saw the questions. Thank you very much for those questions. Specifically in Malawi, I think we have two streams of jobs or employment. So we're talking about the formal and informal employment. On the informal sector, mostly young people that are based in the rural areas. One, because the literacy level is high. We still have young people that drops out of school because of poverty. Their parents could not afford to send their children to school. So these are the people mostly that found mostly in informal employment, informal jobs. While the formal jobs strictly much in towns and urban, because these are some areas where we have people that have gone to school and they are sending their children to good schools where they start speaking English when they are too young and all those things. And in terms of access to quality education, young people that are in town are much far from young people that are in the rural areas. That I think speaks on the last question that talks about inequalities. Inequalities, yes, there's so much inequalities in Malawi, starting from the education sector, the health sector. As we speak now, somewhere in Malawi, that 200 young people have dropped out of school because they couldn't go to school, and some of them have gotten into pregnancy because they couldn't access sexual reproductive health services. So I would classify the first question in that sense, that we have two employment sectors, formal and informal, and based on where you are in the rural and the urban centers, you get one of those, you use one of those employments. In terms of, are there any support available for young people that are not on any employment? No, but we have what we call social cash transfer. And the social cash transfer program targets only children and the parents or people, elderly people that are not on any employment, but also they are too young, raising the family within them, so they are keeping themselves. So we have children that are managing fellow children, because maybe their parents, both of their parents passed on because of maybe the pandemic, HIV and AIDS, because of COVID. So these are the people that are being targeted with the cash transfer, social cash transfer funds. But again, looking at the package is too small. It's around less than I would say less than $2 per month. And sometimes the government will not remit the same when the month elapses. Now, it brings again the challenges in terms of how these people survive. Have I answered that question, the last bit actually?
I'm on mute here. There's actually another question for you here from Sally, I think. Just I don't know if you have a chance to read it. It's how do we ensure more visibility for young people from Malawi in the conversations we're having in Ireland and in the global north on mental health? Yeah. Is that some? Yeah.
Okay. I think it's a very good question. This kind of conversation, if we regularly have them, I think it will also open up to other young people to learn more in terms of how other countries, how the global north is doing in terms of tackling the challenges that young people are facing. Unlike doing it ourselves as a country, I think I believe most of the time peer learning is very important and very key, because peer learning it doesn't require academic understanding. It's a matter of just interaction. So if we can have these kind of peer learning sessions where we interact often on different topical issues, including mental health, I think we can find means and the mechanisms on how we can work with young people that are in the rural areas and that are vulnerable to facing issues of mental health, to make sure that we reduce the numbers of young people that are going through psychological problems, including stress, depression, and other things that will also lead them, if not properly managed, into self-harm and other outcomes. I can't hear you if you can unmute.
Oh, sorry, I'm on mute. Sorry, Clement, sorry. I should, thank you very much for that. There's another question here for all of you. Faye, do you want to maybe speak to it? Because, yeah, because it might be easier just briefly, yeah.
Sure. I filled in a survey the other day. I'm studying at the moment, and I filled in a survey about after graduation. And I'm a lot older than you, Calum, and a lot of your peers. But it just struck me so much of the questionnaire I filled in. It was all about money and how much you're going to earn and how you're going to develop to earn more and how you could progress through the company to earn more. And it was just, and maybe it's because I'm studying social justice, but it just ripped of neoliberalism and capitalism, the whole questionnaire. And how do we define within our own age group, me as a middle-aged woman, and within kind of like across all of the age demographics, new definitions of success. And some of that is, of course, economic. And I 100% agree with you. Minimum wage and living wage should not be different things at all. It's just a ridiculous concept. Could be. But how do we start to change mindsets, and how do we work towards the issues that we're trying to address and be involved in careers that will address those issues without it being purely financially driven?
Okay, and that's for everybody. I think that question, Faye,
Yeah.
that for all four. Yeah, which I think is a good question. I suppose really, yeah, a lot of the metrics around employment is around, well, it's, how do I'm not saying everybody, but it's the salary, but there's also so much more around a job that challenges, a job that I enjoy, a job that I'm proud to be involved in, work that and there's so much more. And I think we are seeing changes because of the pandemic. There's a big thing, and I don't know, it's called the big resignation. A lot of people are reflecting on life and seeing what's important, and there are a lot of people moving. I think there's twice as many people who are thinking about moving their employment than before the pandemic. But anyway, I'll stop there. So I don't know, Lavina, Sinead, Callum, Clement, do you have any thoughts on maybe how we can look at try to redefine work? Work is not just solely about, of course we need money and wages to pay the bills and to have a good, decent life and whatever, but that some of the, I suppose, the talk around work is solely around, well, and we see that with some of the jobs where it's about the salary and people are on very high salaries because, but we found in the pandemic that actually the most important people were the people who did those people working in hospitals, the staff in the retail outlets, the people on the front line who kind of kept the country going while, when we were. So anyway, I'll stop there. So who wants to start off on that question?
I can start.
Yes, tell us.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the question really needs critical thinking and also strategic mindset change. Even here in Malawi, when we talk about employment, most of the time we think about being employed somewhere and get a white-collar job, kind of. Luckily, I'm one of the person who does the program on one of the TV stations as a host. I did chat with one guy who is professionally trained as a nurse, but a year later, he decided to venture into agribusiness. The first harvest, after renting a land for around 40,000, I don't know how much island money would be, but 40,000 is about 20, if not $40, actually $50. So he rented a space of at least to the amount of $50, and he planted in the tomato. And after the first harvest, he got 6 million Malawi kwacha. The second harvest, he paid back the money to someone who he owed, and again replanted again some other plants in the field. What I wanted to emphasize that this guy trained as a nurse, but he ventured into agribusiness, and currently he's a millionaire. He's a multi-millionaire kind of a young person within 2 years. Yeah. So when I recorded that program and I aired on my program, a lot of the people, a lot of parents, a lot of other people who thought agriculture is not sexy and it cannot bring them a lot of money, started thinking like, okay, so someone who is a trained the nurse is now as a millionaire because he's doing agriculture, he's in the agribusiness. And this guy, as I'm talking now, day in, day out, people go there, including universities that are in agricultural sector, go there to learn more things about agribusiness for their students, which means there's a lot that we need to do in terms of changing the mindset of young people to start thinking that when we talk about employment, we're not talking about formal employment, but the informal employment, again, is key and can change the whole poverty cycle within themselves. And currently, this young man has employed 22 young people And one of his managers is a graduate from one of the universities that we call Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources. And he's the manager. He manages his field now. So I think for me, when we talk about employment, it should not be limited to white collar jobs where you sit in the office and start working on other things, but we can scale up our thinking and start directing young people to do more other than waiting for the government to employ them or the private sector to employ them. Fortunately, for Malawi, from the enablers that we are looking for in the Malawi 2063, which I mentioned, the 3 pillars, one of the enablers is mindset change. And in the mindset change as an enabler of the Malawi 2063 is also persuading young people to start thinking about other opportunities that are there, the green economy, the agricultural sector, agribusiness, as formal and informal employment within themselves. So I'm thinking the more we raise awareness about what employment is and define what employment can be, I think we can engage more young people, and more young people can stop stressing themselves looking for jobs and venture into agribusiness.
Yeah, no, Clement, that's a really important point. It's really to kind of, open your horizons to be much bigger and look at things in a broader way, as you said, rather than it's solely about, somebody's going to employ me. It's about thinking, well, and I suppose it's also, coming from where we come as youth workers, is around getting people to think about things differently. Because sometimes if you frame it such a way, you kind of then becomes very challenging if you kind of feel, and it's about giving people the confidence and the motivation to look at different ways of dealing with and addressing employment. So Sinead, did you want to maybe have a response to that question?
Yeah, I just want, I think it's how society views success. So what is success? So to look at that question. So we view success as if you have the latest car, if you have a big house, if you have all these materialistic things. That's how we've been brought up, and that's how I think the education system also views success. So it's what you have, not who you are, or what your beliefs are, or what your values are, or what you bring to society. It's more about what you have in society, and I think we need to start looking at that and reframing kind of that question. And it's also the government views success and rewards success as well. So the richer, don't pay as much tax, where the middle income earner always seems to be the person that's always kind of screwed when it comes to different things. They can't have access either up or down the ladder. And James, you're right, the pandemic has changed people's views on their jobs or their value, or how they felt valued during the pandemic, I think. And I think as a youth sector, we really stepped up to the mark during the pandemic, and we probably have the less investment from the government. And I think we were holding that line all the time on the front line for young people. We were the social workers, we were the mental health supports during that time. Those of us that were working on the ground, and we responded in a very positive way. And we found, because we were responding or trying to respond, that we couldn't gain access to those public paid jobs that are held in more esteem or seen as being more successful by the government. So we couldn't get access to social workers. We couldn't get access to council staff around housing or maintenance, or whatever the issue might have been for families and for young people. So it's definitely how society views what success is, and those successful jobs, or those jobs for life, instead of having a more holistic approach to your life, that it's not all about the job, it's about how you as a person, as a human, are contributing to society. Yeah, that's my piece.
Great. Yeah, Sinead, thanks a million for that. I definitely agree with that. I think it is really, we definitely need a much kind of wider kind of view of that. Lavina, have you any thoughts in relation to that?
Yeah, literally copying from Sinead again, but it just shows we're in the same area, but yeah, talking about the importance of the title is what we used to always come up with here. But we were talking about, the way social care, we were all on the front line and the youth service, but they weren't, the pay for them is not as great as some of the other ones. And a lot of the time we had a lot of young people who wanted to go into nursing, and they were like, what is the point? Because we're not going to be able to get the pay. And one of the young women said to me, actually, it was kind of heartbreaking. It was it's like the government are taking advantage of our care and nature. And it was really sad to think that you would give up a caring job and you're everything you are as a person because it's not going to pay you or give you that title of being successful. Which is, it's hard, like, you know, to try and push, because in our, like, for me working with young people, it's literally my life and I absolutely love it, but I always say I'll never get rich in it. But it's just when the young person points that out, that, you know, your care nature's been taken advantage of, it does kind of like sit with you and be like, oh, it is kind of, it's hard going.
Yeah.
But yeah, we just have to support them to do what they love, I suppose.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're right. I mean, it is around kind of recognition of the profession of youth work and the value, you know, it brings to, you know, the difference you're making in people's lives. And just say, certainly in the COVID research we published during the summer, I mean, that came across so much from the young people. They really did recognize that, you know, the difference that youth workers were making in their lives anyway, but actually how such a lifeline they were for them during COVID in particular. And I think certainly the young people recognize it. Unfortunately, I suppose government doesn't, you know, recognize it enough, and we definitely need to reward people more for the great work that you and Sinead and others are doing, you know, that it is making, you know, but I suppose in some respects it is, you are making, you know, obviously we all have to put food on the table and pay the bills, but there is just something as well about doing a job that you enjoy and you get fulfillment from, you know. Callum, I know you were working, you were mentioned there last year, you were working in the bar and stuff, and you're starting on a career, and it's a great place in some respects to be in. Have you any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I really like that question. I think there's a major, like an intergenerational focus on this question. Like, I know it was like, I'm 19 now. I was born in 2002, and it was drilled into me that, you know, it was good leaving cert, good college, get a job. And I remember when I turned around to my grandmother and was like, oh, I'm dying to do politics up in Dublin. She was like, and is there a state job in that, or is there a civil job? Or it wasn't like, what's the
pension?
Yeah, exactly. And sure, like at the time I was like, oh yeah, it's grand, like, you know, like, yeah, it'll go great. But like, it wasn't that, you know, what's the course you're doing? What are you doing in that course? Why do you want to do it? Are you enjoying it? It was a very much a focus on career path and personal finance and being able to uphold the family. And I suppose that comes from a very traditional mindset. I know, like, I love my nana, she's a legend, but I would have loved to only been chatting to her about the ins and outs of my course. I wrote a piece back while I was working in the bar, actually, called "To Serve But Not Be Served." It was in the Limerick Leader, and it was about basically the contradiction at the time of working as a young person during COVID. But I think, like, it's the same here, to serve but not be served. That's what happens. That's what, like, a lot of young people anyway are forced into, that they have to serve but not be served on the other end. That, you know, there might be some, like I think Lavina said it great, that, you know, people, their caring nature might be exploited, that, you know, they're serving and they're giving so much to a job that they care so much about, but on the flip side, they're not being served, they're not being paid properly for the work that they're doing, they're not being looked after by the state like they should in the proper manner. And I think that's the general kind of focus around a lot of employment, and a lot of like low paid employment in Ireland especially, is that there's a heavy emphasis on serving people. And I know I felt like a heavy onus of that during the summer. I was working in a pub that had just opened, and obviously when you just open a pub, there's a lot of expenditure there that's gone out the door that, you know, you have to try and cover. And it was like working non-stop all summer, trying to make this place running, even though I had absolutely no stake in the company. It made no difference to me whether it worked or not. I didn't really know the people that were running it, but it was just because I the job, it was like, oh my God, I've got this job. And that's what happens to a lot of young people. I know that you get so caught up in that feeling. And I think that it kind of does tie back to the conversation around mental health as well, that, you know, young people can often struggle to find a place where they have where there's like that sense of belonging, and that a job can kind of really bring that sense of belonging and value. And when that's taken away, it can be very difficult. But I think there's a major intergenerational question to be asked about the focus around, you know, how much is that going to be paying? Because I know that was the first question I got from everyone over the age of maybe 30. Yeah, I'm going to say 30 when I said I was studying politics was maybe not the first question, but it was in the first 3 or 4 questions anyway, was an answer like, what could I do and turn around? Oh, sure, TD gets state pension after 2 terms and all this, and sure, like, what are the chances? Like, you know, yeah, so that was definitely that. So I and that's the only reason I know all these things, is because there's the questions that was being asked by grandparents and stuff. So yeah, definitely a major intergenerational focus on that one.
But I think a lot of that as well comes from the fact that they will have lived through tough times and they will have lived through recessions. And a lot of it links into not what you're being paid, but what you need to be paid to have a decent standard of living. And that then comes back to poor social policy. And that's a bigger issue. It's not about your value through what you earn. It's just that you need to earn that to be able to have a safe and decent place to live, put food on your table, to be able to visit the GP, to educate your children, to all of these things. And that is, I think, and I'm sure you're doing this in sociology, a much broader issue from a social policy perspective. And that's where I think it was, I'm not sure if it was Sinead or Lavina that said it, it comes so much back to what our decision makers are doing and the lack of value we are placing on certain jobs and on certain people, not just the financial payment of the money they get paid, but the fact that we have so many people in Ireland that are actually working but are still living in poverty. I think there are more working poor than there are people living in poverty that are on social welfare benefits, and that's terrifying.
Yeah, I think Faye, I agree with that. I think there is something. There is certainly, obviously, we're coming to the end of the session, but if we are doing another session, there's something around the model of employment. Why do some employers need to have minimum wage? Why do they need to have if and when contracts? You know, why do they need to have very low? Is that the business model that they've been supported to develop, which means that people are in precarious employment and on very low wages? And you know, wouldn't it be better if we had a model where by this government always says, well, we obviously employ people in the public sector. We don't create private sector jobs, but they support private sector businesses with also supports, particularly during the pandemic. So surely we should have the government should have some sort of rules and levers to say, well, look, we're not going to subsidize minimum wage jobs. We're not going to subsidize, you know, PU to have people on minimum or 0 hour contracts and stuff like that. But I suppose that debate is broader than just Ireland. It's a global issue, really, isn't it? You know, around.
Absolutely, but I think it's youth that are almost not necessarily scapegoated, but the justification for being allowed to do that. It's like, they're young, they won't mind. They're
in transition.
And that really devalues the young person and the impact that they have on the world and the society and the workplace and all of those things. So it's a massive youth issue. I think it probably affects more young people than anyone else.
No, I agree. I think it's definitely, it is seen they're in transition. So sure, look, they don't need the minimum wage even, you know. Anyway, I think we've come to the end, and actually we've gone a little bit over time, which is always a good sign in terms of any discussion or webinar, that obviously we had good debate and good contributions. And I just really want to thank our 4 contributors, Sinead, Lavina, Clement, and Callum. I think you all brought such great, you know, and some of you at very short notice, you know, made great contributions, and I think covered a wide range of issues around, I suppose, young people in employment, both in the global north and obviously Clement coming from the perspective of the global south. All the issues that were there before COVID, and now, I suppose, on top of that, now we have the COVID scenario. And I suppose our job as those working in the sector is to try and bring that information and issues and, you know, to engage with government to try and address, you know, in all contexts, to try and address those issues that impact on young people in the coming years. And just to say that, I suppose, as a slight aside, we are looking at trying to do a bit of work next year. It hasn't been finalized yet on the impact of, I suppose, on the experience of young people in the labour market in Ireland. And it's very much about getting the experience directly of young people, because we have a lot of debates and discussions around employment policy in Ireland, but young people tend to be left out of it. So I just want to thank our 4 contributors. You gave great contributions, and I'd like to thank those of you who posed questions, and I suppose just to thank Leo and Valerie and Sally and the debate team for hosting this webinar this morning and asking me to chair. And finally, just like to thank all of you for attending and listening and contributing. Yeah, so thanks very much. I don't know, Leo, do I hand it back to you there, maybe just for a final sign off? Yeah.
Yeah, please. Thank you very much, James. And thank you once again to all of everyone this morning, and in particular the guests. I know very short notice, and the rich content that you guys were able to provide was amazing. And we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback. So there is a short survey in the chat, if you wouldn't mind following the link. And also there's more things to come this week. So today we had this session. Tomorrow evening we are joined by Scout in Ireland, who are bringing us through what it means in terms of their global identity around Scouts and the Scouting world. On Thursday, we were doing another similar to what we did this morning around kind of the use of games as a methodology, and also looking at kind of that gaming identity when we look at kind of online games, whether it be violent games depicting gambling, and what is kind of the youth workers' response to that. And then finally, on Friday evening, we are joined by the Sustainable Sleepover Club, who are from Cork. They're a group of young people who have their own podcast, and they are interviewing a couple of very special guests. Valerie, am I allowed to mention the guest yet? Okay, so the first guest we have is Ambassador Geraldine Byrne-Nason will be joining the young people from Cork. So we're really looking forward to it. And it's a beautiful intro to the toy show as well. So you have us at 7 o'clock before I'm sure you're watching the toy show. So once again, thank you all very much. One World Week, of course, it's about solidarity. And this morning, I think we had a beautiful moment of that between youth workers here in Ireland and hearing from the likes of Clement in Malawi. And yeah, the amount of connections is really, really important as well. And so, yeah, once again, thank you very much, James. Thank you. And stay safe, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thanks a million. Have a good day. Yeah, thank you.